The email arrived at 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, a sliver of digital ice in the warm current of my morning coffee. The subject line was an assault of corporate cheerfulness, celebrating our own Genevieve Croft to receive the Athena Award for Ethical Leadership. I read it once, then a second time, letting the words dissolve on my tongue like poison. Genevieve Croft, ethical leadership. The concepts were so violently opposed in my mind that the sentence felt like a physical impossibility, like reading the words dry water or silent scream. 6 months. It had been exactly 6 months since Genevieve Croft, the Director of Human Resources at Sterling Financial Solutions, had sat across a sterile conference table from me, her face a mask of practiced empathy, and told me that my departure was a mutual decision. It was, she'd said, for the best. My best, she'd implied, was somewhere far away from the company I had helped build. I'm Monica. For 7 years, I was the senior systems architect at Sterling. If you've ever used a major banking app that didn't crash during a market panic, or a payment system that processed your transaction in milliseconds, you've likely touched my work without knowing it. I don't write the flashy front-end stuff. I build the foundations, the unbreachable vaults, the load-bearing walls of code that no one ever sees, but everyone relies on. And it was my complaint against Marcus Thorne, the company's golden boy chief operating officer, that had led me to that table with Genevieve. Now she was getting an award for ethics. It wasn't just irony, it was a perversion. It was rewriting history in real time, cementing a lie in the glossy pages of an industry magazine and engraving it on a cheap plaque. My first reaction wasn't rage. It was a cold, quiet clarity, a calm that settled deep in my bones. They thought they had erased me. They thought I was a ghost, a mutual decision who had faded into the silence they'd so carefully constructed for me. But ghosts can still leave footprints, and sometimes they can learn to tear down the house. So I did something that made no logical sense. I opened the link in the email, went to the conference website, and I bought a table at the awards dinner, 10 seats. Front and center, I put the reservation under my own name. Then I made 4 phone calls. The first was to Sarah, formerly of our legal department, pushed out after she'd questioned the compliance paperwork on a deal Marcus had rushed through. The second was to Amelia, our best marketing strategist, let go for redundancy 2 weeks after she'd refused to sign off on a campaign that made promises our tech couldn't keep. The third was to Lena, a brilliant analyst from finance, who suffered a restructuring of her department a month after she flagged a series of very strange expense reports from Marcus Thorne's office. All of them had had a final reassuring meeting with Genevieve Croft. All of them were told it was for the best. All of their departures were mutual. My fourth call was to a reporter at the city paper. I invited him to dinner. I told him I had a story about ethical leadership. If any of what I'm about to tell you sounds familiar, if you've ever poured your soul into a job only to be told you were disposable, then stick around. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. This isn't the story of how I was broken. This is the story of how I learned that when they manage you out, they sometimes accidentally manage you into power. That final day felt like walking through a photograph of my own life. Everything was in its place, but the color was gone, the sounds were muffled. My keycard still worked, a small, insulting miracle. Genevieve had assured me I could have the rest of the day to gather my things and say my goodbyes, a piece of corporate theater designed to make an execution look like a retirement party. My office, a glass-walled box overlooking the open-plan floor, felt like an aquarium. People on the other side, former colleagues, people I'd mentored, people whose project fires I had personally extinguished at 3 in the morning, now moved with a studied, deliberate avoidance of my gaze. They were suddenly fascinated by their keyboards, their shoes, the ceiling tiles. I understood. They were prey animals, sensing a predator had made a kill nearby. To look at me was to acknowledge the kill. To acknowledge the kill was to acknowledge the predator. And you never ever look the predator in the eye. The box in my hands was a pathetic little cardboard rectangle, the standard issue for the professionally exiled. It contained a framed photo of my sister and me, a chipped coffee mug that said "Don't speak until this cup is empty," a stress ball shaped like a database server, and a handful of cheap pens. 7 years of my life, distilled into a box that couldn't even hold a decent-sized pizza. The weight of it was nothing, but the emptiness of it was staggering. As I walked the Green Mile toward the elevators, I passed Marcus Thorne's office. The door was open. He was on the phone, laughing, one expensive, sockless loafer propped up on his mahogany desk. He saw me. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no remorse in his gaze, no guilt. There was a flicker of something that looked like triumph, quickly masked by a performative dip of his head, a gesture of faux sympathy that was more insulting than a victory parade. It was the look of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. This all started because I believed in the rules. That was my first and perhaps greatest mistake. I believed the glossy posters in the break room, the ones with stock photos of diverse, smiling people under words like integrity and respect. I believed the mandatory annual training modules that taught us, in stilted, robotic narration, that harassment was unacceptable and that the company had a zero-tolerance policy. The inciting incident, the one that signed my professional death warrant, wasn't even that dramatic. It wasn't a scene from a movie. It was small and sordid and depressingly common. It was at a client dinner celebrating the launch of a new platform, my platform. We'd landed the biggest fish in our sector, a multi-billion-dollar investment house, and the deal was built entirely on the back of the system I designed and built from the ground up. We called it Arbiter. Marcus was 3 glasses of overpriced scotch into the evening when he cornered me by the coat check. He got too close, his breath a hot, sweet wave of alcohol and self-satisfaction. He put a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that in another context, from another person, might have been collegial. For Marcus, it was an act of ownership. He leaned in, his voice a low conspiracy. He told me, "Monica, you're a real killer. A killer in a skirt. But you know you'd be even more effective if you smiled more. You're always so serious. It makes people nervous." He wasn't looking at my eyes. His gaze drifted down. "You should relax. Let me help you relax." His thumb began to draw small, deliberate circles on my back. My blood went cold. It wasn't the first time. There had been the comments in meetings where he'd call me honey or sweetheart in front of the executive team. There were the accidental brushes in the hallway. The way he'd stand too close when looking over my shoulder at my monitor. I had tolerated it. I had done what so many women are taught to do. I made myself smaller. I ignored it. I pretended it wasn't happening. I told myself it was just his way, that he was harmless, a relic from a bygone era of corporate dinosaurs. I told myself that my work was too important to be derailed by his casual chauvinism. But this time was different. It was the possessiveness of it, the quiet threat couched in a helpful suggestion. It was the fact that he was doing it at the very moment we were celebrating a victory I had delivered. He was taking my work, my success, and trying to smear his grubby ownership all over it. I didn't make a scene. I simply took a step back, dislodging his hand. I looked him directly in the eye and said, "Thank you for the feedback, Marcus, but I'm quite relaxed, and my work speaks for itself." I turned and walked away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought that was the end of it. It was the beginning. The next day, I followed the rules. I documented the incident, along with the previous, smaller ones I had foolishly let slide. I tried to be fair, clinical, unemotional. I focused on the pattern of behavior and its impact on the professional environment. I sent it to the one person the rules told me to trust, Genevieve Croft, Director of Human Resources. I received an automated reply confirming receipt. For a week there was silence, a deep, humming, electric silence. Then the summons came, a meeting request from Genevieve. The subject was anodyne, check-in. I walked into that conference room feeling nervous but vindicated. I was doing the right thing. I was protecting myself and by extension other women at the company. I was holding a powerful man accountable. Genevieve was the picture of corporate grace. She was always impeccably dressed in sharp, minimalist suits, her silver hair cut in a severe, elegant bob. She gestured for me to sit. She didn't sit opposite me. She sat next to me, a classic interrogator's trick to feign intimacy and disarm. She had my email printed out, lying on the table between us. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was my performance review from 6 months prior. It was, to put it mildly, glowing. Words like exceptional, visionary, and indispensable were scattered throughout. My manager, a decent man named David, who was terrified of Marcus, had practically recommended me for canonization. Then Genevieve slid another paper next to it. It was a new performance improvement plan, dated yesterday. It was written by Marcus Thorne. It was a work of fiction. It claimed I was difficult to work with, not a team player, that my abrasive communication styles was creating friction, that I was resistant to feedback. It was a textbook definition of retaliation, so blatant it was almost comical. I stared at it, speechless. Genevieve sighed, a sound of infinite, weary patience. "Monica," she began, her voice soft and reasonable, "Marcus feels that your intensity can be intimidating. He's concerned that you're not receptive to his management style. He put this plan together to help you integrate better with the executive team's vision." I found my voice. It was hoarse. "Genevieve, this is a fabrication. This is retaliation for the complaint I filed against him." She held up a hand. "Now let's not use such charged language. This isn't about retaliation. This is about perception. And in this company, perception is reality. The reality is the C-suite finds your approach challenging." It wasn't a discussion. It was a sentencing. She explained that my role as it currently existed was being reevaluated, that the company was moving in a new, more collaborative direction. She used every piece of meaningless corporate jargon in the book: synergy, agility, proactive ideation. It was a smokescreen of words designed to obscure the simple, brutal truth: I had spoken up and I was being disappeared. And then came the master stroke. She looked at me, her eyes full of what she probably thought was kindness. "Monica, I know this is difficult, but I've been thinking about what's best for you, for your career, and I think perhaps Sterling is no longer the right fit. The work you do is brilliant, truly. But the culture here, it's a strong current. It's easier to swim with it than against it." She was offering me a way out, a generous severance package, a non-disclosure agreement, a mutual decision to part ways. They wouldn't fight my unemployment claim. They would give me a neutral reference. It was a clean, quiet, professional assassination. She made it sound like a favor. She made it sound like my idea. "For the best," she'd repeated, sliding the severance agreement across the table. "I think we can both agree this is for the best." I didn't break down in her office. I didn't break down in the hallway or in the elevator or even as I pushed through the revolving doors into the harsh afternoon sunlight. I held it together. Professionalism is a kind of armor, and mine was polished to a mirror shine. I made it to my car in the parking garage. I sat in the driver's seat, the pathetic little box of my life on the passenger seat next to me. And then, in the gray, concrete silence, I finally shattered. It wasn't loud, dramatic sobbing. It was a quiet, ragged, hopeless sound. The sound of something essential inside me breaking. The humiliation was a physical thing, a sour taste in my mouth, a heavy weight in my chest. It wasn't just that I'd lost my job. It was that I'd been so expertly, so smoothly, so ethically gaslit. Genevieve had taken my truth and twisted it into a story about my own failure, my own difficultness. She had made me the author of my own demise. In that moment, I believed her. I replayed every interaction, every meeting, every email. Was I too abrasive? Was I too intense? Did I not smile enough? I had spent years of my life building an unbreachable fortress of code, only to discover that the institution I'd built it for was made of sand, and its gatekeepers were rewarding the termites. The days that followed were a blur of gray. I went through the motions of life. I updated my resume. I contacted recruiters. I tried to network, but something was broken. The story they had crafted about me had followed me out the door. The recruiters were polite but non-committal. The neutral reference from Sterling was a kiss of death. In our industry, a neutral reference for a senior architect is a screaming red flag. It says, this person didn't burn the building down, but we wouldn't trust them with a match. The severance money was a ticking clock. Each dollar spent a second closer to a future I couldn't see. My confidence, once my most reliable asset, was in ruins. I started sleeping late. The crisp, logical world of code on my laptop screen felt alien. Who was I if I wasn't? Monica, the architect, the catalyst, the thing that pulled me out of the spiral, came 3 weeks later. It was a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Sarah from the legal department. Her voice was shaky. She asked if we could meet for coffee. We sat in a small, anonymous cafe, far from the financial district. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. She told me her story. She'd been pushed out a month before me. She had raised a flag about the due diligence on a merger. Marcus was championing. The numbers didn't add up. There were regulatory risks he was willfully ignoring. She took her concerns to her boss, who told her to drop it. When she persisted, she was called into a meeting with Genevieve Croft. Genevieve told her she was being overly cautious, that she was not aligning with the company's strategic goals. She was offered a package, a mutual decision. It was, Genevieve had said, for the best. As Sarah spoke, the fog in my brain began to clear. The shame that had been my constant companion started to feel less like a personal failing and more like a shared burden. Her story was my story, just with different details. The language was identical. The method was identical. The method was identical. We weren't difficult. We were inconvenient. We had seen something, and we had said something, and the system was designed to expel those who did. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying 7 years of my life at Sterling, and I started to think about Arbiter, my system, my creation. Arbiter wasn't just a project management tool, it was the central nervous system of Sterling Financial Solutions. It handled everything from client onboarding and trade execution to internal compliance and regulatory reporting. I had designed it to be elegant, efficient, and above all, transparent. Every action, every data point, every change was logged in an immutable cryptographic chain. It was an auditor's dream and a corner cutter's nightmare. It was a system built on the principle of truth, and I realized with a jolt that I had been a fool. I had built a system that reflected my own values and placed it inside a company that had none. There was a feature in Arbiter, a deep-seated architectural component that I had designed years ago. I called it the continuity protocol. The pitch was simple. In the event of a catastrophic system failure or a hostile takeover, we needed a way to protect and segregate client data instantly. It would essentially place all active projects and their associated data into a secure digital escrow, freezing them in a state of verifiable integrity until the system could be stabilized or migrated. It was a parachute, a lifeboat. Marcus had shot it down. Too expensive, he'd said. Over-engineering. We don't need it. But I was the architect. I knew the blueprints. While I never fully built out the activation trigger, the foundational code, the secure hooks into the core database, the encrypted pathways, they were all there, dormant. A ghost in the machine, a quiet, waiting piece of my own foresight. It wasn't designed for revenge. It was designed for protection. It was designed out of a sense of professional duty, but as I lay there in the dark, the pieces started to click into place. Protection. Revenge. Sometimes they look a lot alike. I started to think about the annual federal compliance audit, a brutal, no-nonsense affair that Sterling had to pass to keep its license. It was always in the fall. It was 5 months away, and I was the only person on the planet who truly understood the deep architecture of the system they would be auditing. A quiet heat flushed up my neck. It wasn't despair anymore. It was resolve. It was the cold, clean feeling of an engineer seeing a flawed design and finally starting to draft a new blueprint. The next day, I called Amelia from marketing and Lena from finance. I had a feeling their stories would sound familiar too. The plan didn't form all at once. It wasn't a bolt of lightning. It was more like water seeping into a crack in a foundation. A slow, patient, relentless pressure that builds until the structure gives way. My first conversations with Amelia and Lena were less about strategy and more about therapy. We met at my apartment, a neutral territory, armed with takeout and a shared sense of betrayal. Amelia, fiery and sharp, had been the heart of Sterling's brand. She'd fought Marcus on a new ad campaign that promised clients guaranteed alpha, a term so legally dubious it was laughable. She'd told him it would expose the company to lawsuits and regulatory fines. A week later, her entire team was restructured, and she was let go for not being a forward-thinking marketer. Genevieve had overseen the transition, praising Amelia for her service while handing her a box for her desk belongings. A mutual decision. For the best. Lena's story was quieter, but more chilling. She was a data savant, a woman who could see the narrative in a spreadsheet. She had noticed irregularities in Marcus's executive expense account, trips to conferences that never happened, extravagant dinners with consultants who had no digital footprint. It wasn't just a few $1,000s, it was a significant systematic drain. She followed protocol and flagged it to internal audit. The next thing she knew, her entire department's functions were being outsourced to a third-party firm in another state. Her position was eliminated. Genevieve had been profoundly sorry to see her go, a tough but necessary business decision. We all have to adapt. It was for the best. As we sat there sharing the details, the identical phrases, the same hollow-eyed look of empathy from Genevieve, the pattern became undeniable. We weren't four individual cases of bad luck or poor performance. We were a dataset. We were the casualties of a deliberate, repeatable process designed to purge anyone who threatened Marcus Thorne's ascent or exposed his incompetence. Genevieve wasn't an HR director, she was a cleaner. Her job was to quietly and efficiently dispose of the bodies, and her Woman of Ethical Leadership award was the ultimate insult. It was her prize for being so good at her job. That night, the anger that had been a low-banked ember in my chest flared into a cold blue flame. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that, over and over. It wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. It was about rebalancing an equation that had been deliberately skewed. It was about the integrity of the system, both the one I had built from code and the one we all had to live in. We decided then and there that we wouldn't be silent ghosts. We would be a presence. Buying the table at the awards dinner was the first step. It was a public act of existence, a way of saying, we are still here, we remember. But a gesture wasn't enough. A gesture could be dismissed as sour grapes. We needed leverage. We needed something that couldn't be ignored, and that's when I told them about Arbiter. I explained the system in the simplest terms I could. I told them it was the company's brain, its memory, and its conscience. I described the dormant continuity protocol, the digital lifeboat I had built into its DNA. I told them about the upcoming federal audit. They listened, their eyes wide. Amelia, ever the marketer, saw the narrative immediately. Lena, the analyst, saw the financial and regulatory risk. Sarah, the lawyer, saw the breach of contract implications for their clients. It was a perfect storm of incompetence waiting to happen, but we were missing a key piece of information. We needed to know what was happening inside Sterling now. We needed eyes and ears on the ground. We needed an insider. My mind went immediately to Chloe. Chloe was a brilliant junior developer I had hired straight out of university. She was quiet, fiercely intelligent, and had an almost religious devotion to elegant code. I had mentored her, nurtured her talent, and protected her from the corporate politics that so often crushed young idealists. She saw me not just as a boss, but as a protector. When I was forced out, she had sent me a one-line email, "This is wrong." I had never replied, not wanting to put her in a difficult position. Now I needed her. I hesitated for a full day before contacting her. Asking for help felt like a betrayal of the mentorship I had given her. It felt like dragging her into my war. But then I realized it was her war too. She was still inside that broken system. So I sent her a carefully worded text, asking if she'd be open to a confidential chat about a potential freelance project. We met in a noisy, crowded park, the kind of place where you can be anonymous in plain sight. She was pale and stressed. She told me things were a mess since I'd left. The team was rudderless. The new manager they'd brought in was a project manager, not an architect. He didn't understand Arbiter's core logic. He treated it like a black box. They were, in her words, flying blind, and then she gave me the piece of information that changed everything. Sterling had hired a third-party consulting firm, a flashy, expensive outfit called Innovate, to perform a major system upgrade. Marcus had championed them. Their job was to add a new suite of client-facing features, and they were scheduled to push the update live just 2 weeks before the federal audit. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a catastrophic, amateur mistake. You never ever perform a major system overhaul right before an audit. It's like performing open-heart surgery on a marathon runner the day before the race. The risk of introducing data integrity errors, of corrupting the audit trail was immense. Any competent architect would have vetoed it instantly. But I wasn't there to veto it. I asked Chloe very carefully about the update. I didn't ask her to steal anything or sabotage anything. I just asked for her professional assessment. How were they handling the legacy data? How were they ensuring the integrity of the cryptographic logs that Arbiter was built on? Her expression told me everything I needed to know. They weren't. Innovatic was treating it like any other software update, bolting on new features without understanding the foundation. They were, she said, paving over the load-bearing walls. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to hack into their systems or plant a virus. All I had to do was wait. They were going to detonate the bomb themselves. All my plan required was a witness to the explosion and a way to control the narrative when it happened. That's where Ben Carter, the reporter, came in. I had followed his work for years. He had a knack for untangling complex corporate scandals and a deep-seated cynicism for executive platitudes. I reached out to him with a simple, intriguing pitch: 4 women, 1 company, and the untold story behind an ethical leadership's award. He was skeptical, as a good reporter should be, but he agreed to meet. We met at Sarah's office. She had started her own small consulting firm specializing in employment law. The 5 of us sat around a table: the architect, the lawyer, the marketer, and the analyst. One by one, we told our stories. We didn't just bring anecdotes, we brought evidence. I had my glowing performance review and the fictional improvement plan. Sarah had her documented warnings about the merger. Amelia had the email chain where she refused to approve the guaranteed alpha campaign. Lena had a copy of the internal audit request she had filed. It was a mountain of paper, a quiet testament to a silent purge. We laid it all out: the pattern, the language, the method. Then I explained the final piece, the ticking time bomb of the Arbiter update. I drew a diagram on a whiteboard, explaining how the new code would likely corrupt the audit logs, making it impossible for Sterling to prove its compliance to the federal regulators. I explained that the consequences wouldn't just be a fine. It could lead to a suspension of their operating license. The failure would be catastrophic, and it would be a direct result of them removing the only person who knew how to prevent it. Ben listened, his pen scratching furiously in his notepad. By the end of our meeting, his skepticism was gone. It was replaced by the hungry gleam of a predator who has caught the scent of a major story. He agreed to sit at our table at the awards dinner. He understood that the story wasn't just about what had happened to us. The real story was about what was going to happen next. The plan was set. The pieces were on the board. All we had to do now was wait for the checkmate we knew was coming. It wasn't about revenge. It was about architecture. They had built a house of cards on a faulty foundation. I was just going to provide the gentle breeze. The first ripple of our plan was almost imperceptible. It was the simple act of the awards dinner seating chart being circulated among the event's gold-tier sponsors, which included Sterling Financial Solutions. Someone in their marketing department, a junior employee probably tasked with mapping out where the executives would sit, would have seen the name on table 12, Monica Sheridan, and right under it the names of my guests: Sarah Vance, Amelia Chen, Lena Petrova, and Ben Carter, the City Chronicle. To an outsider, it was just a list of names. To anyone inside Sterling's circle of power, it was a declaration of war. The phone call from Genevieve came 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a masterpiece of feigned nonchalance. "Monica, darling, it's Genevieve. I was so surprised and delighted to see you'll be attending the Athena dinner. How wonderful. I was hoping we could catch up before then. Give me a call when you have a moment." The word darling was a weapon, an attempt to reposition us as old friends, to infantilize me. The surprise was a lie. I knew from a contact at the conference organizing committee that Genevieve's assistant had called them frantically, trying to find out who had bought the table and if it could be relocated to the back of the room. They had, of course, refused. I didn't call her back. Silence is a canvas. It lets the other person paint a picture of their own fears. 2 days after that, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my apartment. It was from Sterling's outside counsel. It was a cease and desist letter, a baroque and threatening document full of dire warnings about my non-disclosure agreement. It accused me of planning to engage in activity intended to cause reputational harm to the company. It was a bluff, and a clumsy one at that. Attending a dinner is not a breach of an NDA. Sarah, our lawyer in exile, laughed when I showed it to her. "This is panic," she said, tapping the paper. "This isn't a legal strategy, this is a scare tactic. They have no idea what we're planning, so they're shooting in the dark." We sent back a polite one-sentence response drafted by Sarah, stating that I fully intended to comply with all my legal obligations and that I looked forward to celebrating Genevieve's achievements at the dinner. It was the corporate equivalent of smiling serenely while someone is screaming in your face. Meanwhile, the real drama was unfolding inside Sterling's walls, and Chloe was my only window into the chaos. She sent me terse, encrypted updates. The Innovatkit consultants were cowboys. They were arrogant, dismissive of the existing code, and completely deaf to her warnings. She had tried, cautiously, to explain the fragility of the audit log system. They had patted her on the head, figuratively speaking, and told her they knew what they were doing. The day of the system update arrived. Chloe sent me a single message at 5:02 p.m., just after the consultants had pushed the button. They did it. For the next 48 hours, I heard nothing. The silence was unnerving. I resisted the urge to contact her, knowing the risk she was taking. Then on a Friday morning, she sent another message. "It's happening." I called her on a secure line. Her voice was a strained whisper. The system hadn't crashed. On the surface, everything looked fine. The new features were live, but behind the scenes, it was a bloodbath. As she had predicted, the update had fractured the cryptographic chain of the audit logs. Historical data was becoming unreadable by the system's own verification tools. It wasn't gone, but it was corrupted in a way that made it inadmissible for a federal audit. It was like having a library of books where all the pages were stuck together. You could prove the books existed, but you couldn't read them. Sterling was now, from a regulatory perspective, flying blind into its most important examination of the year. The panic inside the company, as she described it, was biblical. The new manager was in over his head. The Innovatkit consultants were deflecting blame, claiming the legacy system was poorly documented, a direct attack on me. Marcus Thorne was, for the first time in his charmed life, terrified. He was screaming at people in meetings. He had ordered the tech team to work around the clock to fix it, but they couldn't fix it. They didn't have the blueprints. They were trying to repair a Swiss watch with a hammer. This was the moment the silent takeover truly began. It wasn't me taking over the company. It was reality taking over their fantasy. The fantasy was that I was replaceable. The reality was that by purging the architect, they had lost the architectural key to their own kingdom. They just hadn't realized it until they found themselves locked in. Our next move was Ben Carter's. Armed with the technical information from me and the human stories from all of us, he began making quiet, off-the-record calls. He didn't call Sterling. He called their clients. The big ones. The investment houses and pension funds whose contracts with Sterling were contingent on flawless regulatory compliance. He didn't mention us. He didn't mention the purge. He simply asked, as a reporter covering the fintech space, if they had been briefed on Sterling's recent major system overhaul and if they were confident in the company's data integrity ahead of the upcoming federal audit. He was just asking questions, but they were the right questions. They were seeds of doubt planted in the most fertile ground imaginable, the minds of risk-averse clients who managed billions of dollars. A client asking about data integrity is a routine check. A reporter asking about it is a fire alarm. The company was now being squeezed from two sides, internally by a technical crisis they couldn't solve, and externally by clients who were suddenly getting very nervous. The power was shifting. The foundation was cracking, and the awards dinner was just 1 week away. The phone call I had been waiting for came on a Monday morning, 5 days before the awards dinner. The caller ID said Sterling Financial Solutions. I let the phone ring, my heart a steady, slow drum. I let it ring 4 times, then answered with a calm, neutral, Monica Sheridan. The voice on the other end was strained, tight, a man trying to sound casual while his world was on fire. It was Marcus Thorne. Monica, he said, the false bonhomie dripping from his voice. How are you? It's been too long, I said nothing. Silence is power. Let him fill it. He cleared his throat. Listen, we have a bit of a situation here with Arbiter. A few glitches with the new update. Nothing major, but, well, you know this system better than anyone. We were hoping we could retain you as a consultant, just for a few days to help us smooth things out. I could hear the frantic coaching from Genevieve in his stilted, unnatural language. Don't sound desperate. Don't admit fault. Frame it as a collaboration. I waited a beat. A consultant, I repeated, my voice flat. Yes, we'd of course be prepared to offer you a very generous daily rate. Name your price. We value your expertise. This was it. The moment of desperation. The moment where their arrogance finally collided with their incompetence. The old me, the woman who had packed her life into a cardboard box 6 months ago, would have felt a surge of triumph, a desire to rub his face in it. But the new me felt nothing but a cold, clear focus. This wasn't about emotion. This was a business transaction. I'm not currently taking on individual consulting projects, Marcus, I said, the words falling like stones into a deep well. I could hear a sharp intake of breath on his end. Panic. But I continued. My partners and I have recently launched a new firm. We specialize in digital transformation and regulatory compliance for the financial sector. We're called Archimedes Strategy Group. There was a stunned silence. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. Partners? Firm, we'd be happy to assess your situation, and if it's a fit, submit a formal proposal. He stammered. Partners? Who are your partners? I smiled, a small private smile he couldn't see. Sarah Vance is our head of legal and compliance. Lena Petrova is our chief financial analyst. And Amelia Chen runs our client strategy and communications. I handle the system's architecture. I named every woman he and Genevieve had purged. I listed their names like battle honors. The silence on the other end of the line was now profound. He knew, in that moment he knew he was utterly and completely trapped. They had cast us out, and we had regrouped on the other side of the wall, not as victims but as the only people with the key to the gate. He finally found his voice. It was thin, reedy. Send over the proposal. I said, we will. Our initial diagnostic and proposal fee is $50,000, non-refundable. And Marcus, I added, my voice dropping to a confidential whisper, given the sensitive nature of your problem and the proximity of the federal audit, I'd suggest you treat this with the urgency it deserves. We have a growing client list. I hung up the phone before he could reply. The power shift was complete. We were no longer the ones being managed out. We were the ones they were begging to manage them back from the brink. It was never about the money. It was about the principle. They had tried to buy our silence with severance checks. Now, they were going to have to buy our expertise at a price set by us, on terms dictated by us, and the first bill was for showing up to the table they had so violently kicked us out from under. The game had changed. They had been playing checkers, moving their pieces to eliminate ours. We were now playing chess, and we had just maneuvered their king into a position from which there was no escape. The night of the Athena Awards felt like the final scene of a play I had been rehearsing for my entire life. The ballroom of the downtown Hilton was a sea of black ties and sequins, a self-congratulatory ecosystem fueled by champagne and canapés. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. We arrived together, me, Sarah, Amelia, and Lena. We weren't dressed for a funeral or a fight. We were dressed for a celebration. We looked elegant, powerful, and serene. We walked to our table, number 12, directly in front of the stage, and took our seats. Ben Carter, the reporter, was already there, nursing a sparkling water, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. He gave us a small, tight nod. The effect of our presence was immediate and palpable. Conversations faltered as we passed. Heads turned. The ambient chatter of the room seemed to dip for a moment, creating a pocket of silence around our table. I could see the frantic, whispered conversations breaking out at the Sterling Financial Solutions table off to our right. Marcus Thorne was staring at his plate, his face a blotchy, unhealthy red. Several board members I recognized were looking at our table, then at Marcus, then back at our table, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. And in the center of it all was Genevieve Croft. She was seated at the head table on the dais, a frozen, brittle smile plastered on her face. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and hastily glued back together. Her eyes kept flitting towards us, a tiny muscle twitching in her jaw. We didn't do anything. We just sat there. We ordered wine. We chatted quietly among ourselves. We were a portrait of calm in a room crackling with tension. Our silence was louder than any accusation we could have leveled. The awards ceremony began. A parade of executives went up to the stage to receive their honors, delivering predictable speeches about innovation and synergy. Then it was Genevieve's turn. The presenter, the editor of the industry magazine sponsoring the award, launched into a glowing tribute. He used words like integrity, courage, and a true moral compass for our industry. With every word of praise, I could feel the invisible pressure in the room tightening. Then Carter discreetly took out his phone and placed it face up on the table. Genevieve walked to the podium, moving with a stiff, regal grace. She smoothed down her silk dress and gripped the sides of the lectern, her knuckles white. She began her speech, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "I am so profoundly humbled," she began, looking out over the crowd, her gaze deliberately avoiding our table. "To be recognized for ethical leadership is the greatest honor of my career, because ethics are not a line item. They are the very foundation upon which we build our businesses, our relationships, our lives." I almost laughed. She was using my metaphor, the foundation. She spoke about creating safe and transparent workplaces where every voice can be heard. She talked about the importance of difficult conversations and mutual respect. It was a masterclass in hypocrisy, a beautiful, hollow sculpture of words. As she reached the crescendo of her speech, the part about her unwavering commitment to doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, Ben Carter's thumb swiped across his phone screen. He hit publish. A moment later, a phone buzzed at a nearby table, then another, and another. A quiet epidemic of vibrations spread through the ballroom. Heads dipped down. The blue glow of screens reflected in 100 pairs of eyes. I saw the face of Sterling's chairman of the board, a formidable old man named Arthur Kensington, as he read the screen of his phone. His expression went from polite interest to slack-jawed shock. He looked up from his phone, his eyes locking first on Genevieve at the podium, then on Marcus at the Sterling table, and then, with a look of chilling comprehension, directly at me. On stage, Genevieve was losing her audience. The energy in the room had vanished, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. Her voice faltered. She knew something was wrong. Her smile tightened, becoming a rictus of panic. My own phone buzzed. It was a notification from the City Chronicle app. The headline was stark, brutal, and perfect. Ethical leadership honoree at center of whistleblower purge. Company faces regulatory crisis. The subheadline was even better. 4 senior women managed out after raising flags. Proprietary system failure now threatens Sterling Financial's operating license. The story was all there. Our stories, the timeline, the identical language of our dismissals, and the technical breakdown of the arbiter crisis, explained in clear, damning detail, quoting anonymous internal sources and concerned clients. Ben had built a case so airtight it was a coffin. Genevieve finished her speech to a smattering of confused, half-hearted applause. She practically fled the stage, her face ashen. She didn't return to her seat at the head table. The rest of the evening was a blur of controlled chaos. The Sterling table emptied out as board members and executives made hushed, frantic phone calls in the lobby. Marcus Thorne scurried out a side door like a rat, leaving a sinking ship. We didn't move. We finished our wine. We ordered dessert. We had paid for the meal, after all. At the end of the night, as we were leaving, Arthur Kensington, the chairman of the board, approached our table. He was an old-school titan of industry, a man who radiated power and gravitas. He didn't look at Ben or the other women. He looked directly at me. His face was grim. "Miss Sheridan," he said. his voice a low rumble. "I believe you sent my company a proposal yesterday. I will be reviewing it personally in the morning. I expect we'll be in touch." He turned and walked away without another word. It was an apology, a concession, and a surrender, all wrapped in one curt statement. We had won, not by shouting but by showing our work. The vindication was not in Genevieve's public humiliation, but in the quiet, undeniable acknowledgement from the man at the very top of the food chain. The system hadn't just been exposed, it was being forced to correct itself. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The story in the Chronicle exploded. It was picked up by national financial news outlets. The stock price of Sterling's parent company took a significant hit. The federal regulators, prompted by the article, announced they were moving up their audit and expanding its scope. 2 days later, an internal memo was leaked to the press. Genevieve Croft had resigned, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. A day after that, Marcus Thorne was terminated for cause. They were gone. Erased. Their departures were not mutual, and it was for everyone else for the best. Our new firm, Archimedes Strategy Group, was officially retained by Sterling Financial Solutions a week after the awards dinner. The contract was ironclad, written by Sarah, with a budget approved by Lena and a communications plan managed by Amelia. Our first act was to walk back into the headquarters of the company that had thrown us out. We weren't returning as defeated employees. We were walking in as the high-priced surgeons brought in to save the patient. We set up our war room in the very conference room where Genevieve had told me my departure was a mutual decision. The irony was so thick you could taste it. My first task was to triage arbiter. I brought Chloe into the war room. I told her to name her title and her salary. She was now the Director of Systems Integrity for Archimedes. The look of relief and vindication on her face was worth more than any contract. Together, we reactivated the continuity protocol. We used my hidden lifeboat to isolate the corrupted data, restore the system from a clean backup I knew how to find, and begin the painstaking process of rebuilding the audit trail. We were rebuilding the company's conscience, one line of code at a time. It wasn't about revenge. I have to keep saying that, because it's important you and I both understand it. Revenge is a fire that consumes you. This was not a fire, this was an act of architecture. We were tearing down a rotten structure to build something stronger, something with integrity in its place. We were not just fixing their code, we were fixing their culture. Our contract with Sterling stipulated that we would also oversee a complete overhaul of their HR reporting and whistleblower protection policies, a project managed by Genevieve's replacement, under the direct supervision of Sarah Vance. Today, I'm sitting in my new office. It's bigger than my old one. My name is on the door, not as senior systems architect, but as managing partner. On the wall opposite my desk, I have two things hanging in a single custom frame. On the left is a printed copy of the program from the Athena Awards, open to the page celebrating Genevieve Croft as a woman of ethical leadership. On the right is the first multi-million-dollar check Sterling Financial Solutions paid to Archimedes Strategy Group. It's a reminder that the stories people tell about you are only as powerful as you allow them to be. A reminder that sometimes being pushed out the door is the only way to see that you have the key to the whole building in your pocket. So if you're out there, if you're listening to my story and it feels achingly familiar, I want you to hear this. If you've ever been underestimated, undervalued, or erased, know that your value does not disappear just because they can't see it. They might be able to manage you out of a job, but they can't manage the competence out of you. They can't take your skills, your relationships, or your integrity. That is your foundation. And on that foundation, you can build anything you want. It isn't about revenge. It's about realizing that your work, your worth, and your future are your own. It's about building your own table instead of waiting for a seat at theirs. If this story helped you, or if you've lived a version of it yourself, let me know in the comments below. It's important to know we're not alone, and if you want to hear more stories about turning professional setbacks into personal power, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening.